Hey there, this is Herculean Hijinks, and I got a bit different of a video today compared to my normal stuff. So I just want to start off and show up. Like today's a beautiful day, man. So I'm out here in Albuquerque, New Mexico. It's April 7th. It's the high 60s, low 70s, and it's just nice out. It's a great day for a cigar. It's a great day for a little video pontification, right? So I feel like I'm me and my cohort. I'm 25, going on 26. I'm a 97 baby, right? Um, I feel like my cohort was the spearhead of Gen Z in a lot of ways, right? Like, as my generation was coming out into the world, we saw a lot of the cracks that formed in the system starting to really show, especially with COVID, where um, we loan so much money that housing is so incredibly expensive now, and tuition is so incredibly high compared, I mean, like compared to median income versus where it was in the 80s or the 90s or even the 2000s, where a lot of things in life that are just expected as being part of the American dream are now so much harder to get than they ever were, right? And I feel like there's a lot of discussion now about Gen Z and their work ethic, right? And again, I'm saying this as somebody that has gone to college, and I have an engineering degree, right? And I busted ass for it, right? And somebody that's worked very hard at my jobs, right? Like I've worked jobs, right? The job I'm at right now, there's weeks I've worked where it's like you're working 70 hours and you're coming in on weekends, and that's just to get the project done, right? Um, I feel like there's this weird bimodal distribution with Gen Z where you have people that are simultaneously the most hardworking people that you've ever met, but also the most materialistic and money-driven people that you've ever met, paired with this other cohort of people that have just given up. And I feel that those two reactions, right? And I have friends that fall into both of these camps. I feel that those are neither of those are healthy reactions, but I feel that they're the only reaction you can do to get by for where things are at now, right? Um, you look at the cost of housing, right? And I'm not just talking about major cities, right? So let's, for the sake of discussion, not consider San Francisco, Los Angeles, Austin, New York, the big cities, right? I'm talking about mid tier cities. I'm talking about Nashville, Tennessee, Columbus, Ohio, right? Miami, Florida, right? Cities where they've been known for being Albuquerque, New Mexico, cities where they've had a reputation of being the affordable cities for a long time. In a lot of these cities, you have rent going for $1,500 for a good rate, starter homes. And again, I'm not talking about like nice places. I mean like old, like built in the 50s, the 60s, fixer uppers, two bedrooms, one bathroom, going for 300K, right? To start out, condos going for 150 to 200, right? I feel like a lot of Gen Z looks at that, and you pair that with the insane price of college, right? And even other assets, if you can call them at that, fundamental tools of American society, like automobiles. Like when I graduated high school, you could get a beater car, right? It wouldn't be a nice car, but you could get a beater used car for $2,000 that would get you from point A to point B, right? Those don't exist anymore, right? Like you can't if you're like some high schooler, working at like KFC, Burger King, or McDonald's, right? Just working, right, and being inducted into into American professional culture. You can't reasonably buy a car like that without assistance from your parents anymore, right? Um, and I feel like in a lot of ways, it's almost a normal reaction that a lot of Gen Z has to this, where you're either going to say, well, I'm just going to give up. I'm going to live at my parents' house. I'm going to be a bum. I'm going to smoke weed. And there's nothing anybody can do about it because things are so difficult now that the notion of getting ahead, the American game plan of I'm going to buy a house, right, with a mortgage, we'll say, and I'm going to have enough left over every month to save that, to put that into investments, to better my future, right? Money that inevitably goes on to be invested in these other crucial areas of the country, right, that push us forward, like tech, right? People can't do that anymore, right? And I don't feel that it's fair to say that Gen Z is just inherently lazy because they don't want to partake in that, right? They're getting a bad deal in life. And I feel that the other reaction, which is also equally unhealthy, of saying, and again, I'd consider myself to fall into this camp and a lot of my friends, where you're going to laser focus on money. And this is where my head's been at for the past 2 years now. Really, since I was 14, I've been like this, but it's gotten worse in the past 2 years. Is um, every day I think about money. Every day I think about buying a house. Every day I wake up and I check Zillow. And I swear I'm not being hyperbolic here. I check Zillow and I look desperately to see if anything comes up where it would be affordable. And it's like, oh, a house just popped up for 200K, right? And yeah, it's got like, a lot of problems, and, the flooring would need to be replaced, and you'd need to replace a lot of drywall. But maybe, just maybe, that property, I could buy it, right? And then some boomer walks by with cash and buys it 10% over its asking price, right? Within a week of it being on the market, right? Um, I don't think that you can expect people to not have one of those true reactions when that's the reality, right? And keep in mind, I'm saying this as somebody that I really want to have a family one day. I really want to have kids. And I don't feel like those goals are feasible for most people where they're at. I feel like a lot of those things will be available to me with time, right? I'm 25, right? I still have time, but when you're talking to people that it's like, Gen X, the boomers, right? These are people that could afford to have kids when they were like 25, right? And kids happen. Some people, it's like kids just happen to them, right? But I mean, like people that have planned on having families, it's like we're shocked that people don't want to have kids anymore, right? And that's like a Fox News talking point, I guess. Like, why don't the young people want to have kids, and why don't the young people want to get married? It's like, well, if the only way you can afford the American dream of having a house and a car, right, is to have two parents working, two people working full time, there's not enough time for people to have kids in that, right? And I feel like we're getting to this point in culture where it's like, even if you do have kids, and even if you do that, it's like, are people going to have time to spend with their kids? Are people going to have time to raise their kids, right? Like, Foster the People, it's kind of like a millennial band, right? The famous song Pumped Up Kids, right? There's a line in it: Daddy works a long day, and he's coming home late, and he's coming home late, right? Like, even kids that are growing up in households where the parents are married, a lot of these people don't have time to get to know their fathers when they're young, right? And there's a lot of like really important things that kids are missing out on because of the state of the economy, right? And I think that's tragic, because when people don't know what it's like to be in a loving household, right, with loving parents, they're not going to know how to create that for the future. And a lot of people talk about how terrible the dating market is now. And maybe if you're older, you haven't heard about this, but that's like a very common sentiment for younger people. And I feel like it's almost not surprising at all that people are struggling to have stable, dependable relationships where they're growing up in these circumstances where they didn't get to really know their dad, right? And that's not even talking about how many single mothers and divorced households there are these days. I mean, it's horrible. And I feel like when you talk to a lot of the older generation, right? A lot of Gen X and a lot of the baby boomers, they're like, well, you just got to work really hard, right? And good things will come to you if you just work really hard. It's like, that may have been true in 1980, 1990, and the early 2000s, but that that's been eroding really ever since 2008. That level of like economic opportunity, and I feel like the millennials kind of got dealt a bad hand as well, but a different bad hand than Gen Z. Whereas with the millennials, when they were coming out into the world and they were starting to develop their skills, they had 2008 happen. And even though assets weren't as crazy inflated as they are now, there was less economic opportunity. Whereas I feel with Gen Z, they kind of have the opposite problem where, the Fed's starting to, cool the job market down a bit, but there was all this economic opportunity, but assets were so crazy expensive that even with a good job, it was almost unfeasible for people to partake in American culture and to have a piece of the American pie, right? Um, I feel that's less accessible than it's ever been. And I feel like down the line, that's only going to make us worse and weaker as a country. The young have always taken care of the old. That's the natural order of things. You grow up, your parents raise you, and one day your parents can't work and they retire, right? And they get a few decades, right, of retirement, right? And they get to a point where they need help, right? My grandpa just moved to a nursing home. And let me tell you something, it's not 60, 70 year olds that are taking care of my grandpa. It's millennials, it's Gen Z, it's hardworking nurses that are going around. And I don't want to make this sound like a slight against old people, but when you get older, a lot of people get rude just because that's where their brain goes, right? It's a physical phenomena. And, these people have to put up with a lot and they're busting ass. And you're telling those people that they can't afford houses. You're telling those people that they can't afford to send their kids to college when they're taking care of you. And I feel that in and of itself is just a wild contradiction. And I feel like you have a lot of depression, and you can see the rates of mental illness and anxiety that have just ballooned over the years, right? And some of that's due to social media, right, where everybody's comparing themselves to the best snippets of other people's life. And it's like, okay, well, you see the person, they get the nice house and the nice car, but you don't see the incredible loan they took out. And you don't see that 60% of their income is going to housing and the other 20% of their disposable income is going to their car, and they're struggling to meet ends meet. You just see, the house and the car, right? I feel like that's a part of it, but I feel like another big part of it, right, and especially with young men, is they feel like losers, and they feel like they failed at life because they don't have these things, right? And I could tell you these things, like conversations I've had with friends. It's like, dude, like, you are not a failure. The system has failed you. I have a buddy that's a union guy, and he got into a really good union for sheet metal, and he works very hard, right? And when he decided to do that, his parents were very critical of that. But he pushed on, and he's making more money than a lot of people that went to college. And I'll have conversations with him, and he feels like very defeated. It's like, dude, like, you're a journeyman, right? Like, what you did throughout all of American history, really, like, people have been able to support families on that. And I don't feel that you should hold that against yourself of where you're at in life, when you have made good decisions and you have put in the work, right? And I feel when discussing this with a lot of the older generation, they don't get it. All they see is like, well, back in the 80s and 90s when I was working, these things were feasible. Therefore, they should be now. When realistically, that's just not the case anymore. That's not the case where people can manage a restaurant, right? And be able to have a house and maybe get kids started in college, right? Anyway, I guess I'm kind of rambling at this point, but I feel like people need to have these conversations with their parents, with their grandparents, with their uncles, with their aunts, and they're difficult conversations, and be like, and if you're a parent and you're watching this and you have a kid that's struggling, um, maybe just realize, like, maybe it's not their fault. I'm not saying this for everybody, because there are definitely people that are just genuinely non-starters, but not everybody that's struggling right now is struggling because of their own poor decisions, right? Even if, and I'm saying this, even if everybody took on this crazy money-driven mindset of like, oh, I'm going to earn as much as possible and I'm going to go into all these, there's still not enough to go around. And if everybody who's Gen Z is earning above 100K, all that would happen is the cost of housing would go up even more. Because we have a fundamental issue of there's not enough housing. We have a fundamental issue of colleges can charge as much as they want because their target demographic is the most vulnerable people, right? People don't want to sell their cars anymore because they saw them balloon over the pandemic, right? And if we don't address the root cause of there's not enough housing, of college is too expensive, of cars are too expensive, don't even get me started on healthcare. If we don't address those problems, you're not going to solve the problems of the youth, right? And I hope more people can come to this realization, so we as a country can start making steps forward, right? And part of what that entails is, your your housing value is probably going to go down if they build new affordable housing, right? There's no way around it. And that's just a part of life. You don't get to have everything, right? And you have to have some level of, okay, the people that work really hard should be ahead. I agree with that. But you can't have people that were just born earlier control everything, right? Anyway, so these are my thoughts. Hopefully, my thoughts resonate with some people, and hopefully, some people saw this and it made them think. So I don't know. That's just where I'm coming from. So take care of yourselves.